You see, we are all connected through the holy body. When you need only accept the sacred gift.
Christ!
Like she did.
Temperance, child.
I've taken the liberty of preparing some entertainment for you. Ah, the entertainment. Without further ado, the gallant knight protects the princess fair.
I'm making tea for you.
Move!
It's always like this with you.
How about you open fire instead of your mouth? Long time no see.
Major Krauser?
Why? You can't save her. You can't save anyone.
What's gonna happen to me?
We gotta keep moving forward. We will beat this. Together.
Thanks.
Much like the Plagas scratching underneath my skin, I was itching to do another podcast for the Dark Spider cast, and originally I was actually gonna do one for The Last of Us once it all wrapped up. I don't know why, but I just got like the first 2 episodes out of the way and thought to myself, should I do like a weekly thing, or is this going to be maybe at the end of the season type thing? And then I formulated the plan to want to review the entirety of the season once the finale kind of came to a close, but I just got busy with so many other things. I had a video essay that I was starting to put together for the main channel, and then subsequently a bunch of McFarlane and Marvel Legends figures dropped, and got busy with a couple of other things, as well as contract work for another job, for an outside job that pays the bills. And so that whole time window just kind of flew by me, and I just figured it was a little too late to talk about The Last of Us, but it's not necessarily all that late to talk about another property that has to do with being terrorized by a bunch of creatures that are possessing other human beings, all while trying to protect someone using firearms. It's actually pretty much more similar now that I think about it. But of course I am talking about the Resident Evil 4 remake. At the time of this recording, I literally just beat the game last night. I was a little slow to beat it. I feel like I could have beaten it a little sooner, whether it be through days where I could just like sit down and properly play it instead of just letting kind of like the whole day go by and now playing a bit of it. But at the same time, I'm also an adult. I'm a over 30-year-old adult, and there's days where I legitimately just don't feel like playing video games. I'd rather just watch YouTube videos or edit something. So from time to time, that did manage to happen a couple of times, and that's why it took a little longer to review, or at least finally be done with Resident Evil 4 Remake. But I was compelled enough by the stature of the game, the quality of the game, to do a form of review for you guys. And this review is going to be split up into 2 segments. This initial portion at the very beginning is going to be spoiler-free, no spoilers, so you don't have to worry. I will, however, let a warning go into the microphone here as to where I'm going to go into some spoilery key moments in the game that to me stood out for better or for worse, and mainly play into the factor of what changed from the original, which is also one of the interesting conundrums about me doing this review, is the fact that I am actually in the minority with the original Resident Evil 4. I don't like it. I can't bring myself 100% to say that I hated it. I don't hate it. Hate is such a strong word. But at the same time, I didn't grow up with it. And I feel like we're all going to have that one game that is simply painted by rose-colored nostalgia glasses. Like, it's just never going to be able to be separated. I feel like for me, that game is going to be Ocarina of Time. I feel like Ocarina of Time is that game where I'm like, this game is damn near perfect. But I know I've seen some streamers, I can't name any off the top of my head, but I've seen some streamers and talked to some folks in real life who have played the game at least within the past 5 years. They didn't really grow up with it. They didn't have an N64 when they were a kid. And then they played it and they were like, I don't know what the big deal is. And I'm like, well, you didn't grow up with it. And now I feel like there's the opposite end, the opposite side of the coin here. And that is going to be Resident Evil 4 for a lot of people, where they grew up with Resident Evil 4, played it in 2005 on the GameCube, and then subsequently in other systems, and I barely played it in either 2020 or 2021 when I was still streaming on Twitch. I think it was 2021. It's somewhere around there where I was trying to make my way through all of the Resident Evil games, and I had already played 1 and 2, so I had to play the remake of 3. I played then 4, which leads me to this, and then I actually ended up playing 5 and 6 right afterwards, leading up to 7. Actually, no, 6 I didn't beat because I was just so tired of that game. I felt like I was bloated as hell. Played 7, and then eventually led to the release of 8 in September, I think, of 2021. Yeah, so it was 2021 because I was trying to go through all the Resident Evil games per month. I was trying to do a Resident Evil game per month of the mainline games. So that's when I played for the very first time on PS4, or was it PS5 technically? Or was it still on PS4? I can't remember. But no, it was on PS4 because I still booted it up on there. And so I played RE4 for the very first time. And that was the original, though remastered, cleaned up. And yeah, I thought it was okay. Like I said, I don't like it. There's moments of it that are kind of neat and cool and fun, but I feel like the ratio of the tank controls frustrating me more than not just didn't do enough for me to go, yeah, I like the game. No, I can honestly say I did not like the game. However, I never ruled out the possibility that I would be infatuated by the notion that there was going to be a remake of this game, but being made with the sensibilities and the mechanics at play that made me love Resident Evil 2 Remake. Because when I played RE4, the original, in 2021, this was 2 years after the RE2 Remake, and surprised to everyone, and most definitely surprised to myself, I ended up loving that game. I ended up loving RE2 Remake quite an awful lot. I played both Leon and Claire's scenarios. Haven't played their B scenarios, not because I don't want to. I eventually do want to revisit that, but I just ran out of time. 2019, I think that's when Mario Maker took off. My Twitch streaming was taking off. How long that lasted. But I got busy with an awful lot of other things, and therefore I was just like, I got to move on to other things, to other games and projects. So eventually, I do want to revisit it because I genuinely enjoyed RE2 Remake. So when I heard that there were rumors going around that there was going to be a remake of 4, I thought to myself, okay, even though I didn't like the original, hot take, I am down if they can bring what really worked for the gameplay in RE2 Remake to the setting and the mythology and the lore and the story of RE4. And quite frankly, that's more or less what they did here with Resident Evil 4 Remake. Something that I was already kind of starting to get the vibe of when the trailer started to drop, when gameplay slices were starting to get showcased at State of Plays and some of these online things, and then Capcom doing their own things, just dropping trailers, doing their Capcom showcases, etc. And so little by little, I was like, yeah, this is probably going to nail at least a couple of aspects that are going to almost automatically, by default, simply just by popping in the disc, I knew it was going to be better than the original. I was going to have a marginally better time with this game than I did with the original. And for the most part, that is exactly what we ended up with, except with a couple of things that still don't click 100% and didn't necessarily click for the original RE2. And so I bullet pointed as many things as that I can extrapolate, while at the same time keeping things spoiler free before we get into that midway point where I'm going to talk about some spoilery stuff. So don't worry, there will be a spoiler warning, but for now, you're completely safe. I'd probably say that what makes this game automatically better is, of course, the stuff that is very easy to determine, which is obviously going to be the tech. It's going to be the tech, it's going to be the visuals, it's going to be able to handle everything from a technical standpoint better than the original. And of course, that's due in part to the RE engine. It's going to automatically make it a prettier game, and there's no dancing around it. This is a very gorgeous game to look at. It's able to deliver 60 FPS. I think it could go to 120 FPS if you prioritize frame rate in the options. But it's funny, I started frame rate, but then I was just, in the main menu, I booted up the game, I think like the second or third time, and I was on the main menu, and I was like, okay, you can only change these settings in the main menu. Let me toggle it just to see what it's like, even though for the most part, I favor frame rate over resolution whenever the games give me the options. But it turns out when I swapped to resolution, not only was the resolution just a tad sharper, not, night and day, but it was a little sharper, and I was able to switch on ray tracing, but the frame rate from what I can tell to the naked eye, I'm not Digital Foundry. I'm not, this super advanced, I don't got this kind of tech to be able to measure drop frames or interpolation and all that stuff, but it seems like it's still targeting 60 FPS. I don't know if it's 100% hitting it all the way. I don't know if there's a drop frame here and there, but if there was, I never really noticed it because it was a very consistent from that point forward. This was only about 2 or 3 hours into the game, and for the most part, it runs buttery smooth at that 60 FPS, still able to deliver 4K and ray tracing. Why this game is able to do it, but not goddamn Gotham Knights, I have no fucking clue. But this game is just immaculately gorgeous, and the character models are astounding. The hair follicles on Leon's gorgeous set of hair, are still all there and can be literally counted. I can only imagine how awesome and great looking this game is on PC, most especially the cinematography. If there was any time to deliver like an Oscars equivalent of, if there was an Oscar equivalent of cinematography to Game Awards, which I guess would be for certain, outlets like the Game Awards at the end of the year, art direction, I would say Resident Evil 4 has a very good chance of taking that prize because the lighting and the cinematography, like I said, it's the atmosphere. You can just breathe it all in, see it all, and even hear it all. The sound design is also really good. You can hear an awful lot of the atmosphere, the things creaking. Every so often I'm just walking through and I can hear wood planks just kind of cracking naturally, and I don't know if somebody's stepping on it or if it's just because they're naturally doing that. The crickets chirping, but then also just the diegetic sound that you just hear all around that, again, is either natural or is being acted upon by Leon, whether it's him cracking some of the barrels, cocking a gun that fits the size or the caliber of the gun, whether it be a pistol or rifle. It all sounds great. And then, of course, the gory, bloody crunch of when you kill some of these enemies, you hit them in the head or the legs or whatever. It all just comes to a really good punch and like I said, crunch that feels and sounds and looks very satisfying. I would probably say if there was a nitpick that I would have to notice that I noticed very early on, but I was very quick to forgive and forget, was maybe some of the texturing on rocks. Overall, almost every texture in the game is awesome except rocks for some reason. I don't know if it was just me personally, but there were moments where there are certain caverns and mountainsides that I'm kind of like walking past, especially during the earlier part of the game when you're going through the village and the castle, where the ray tracing that's bouncing off of some of these surfaces is awesome as far as things looking wet, and then you see fire, the light of the fire, or Leon's lamp or his flashlights bouncing off really well. But then when you're just seeing it straightforward without any lighting kind of bouncing off of it, I don't know what it is, but the texture looks a little on the flat side for me. But again, it was a very minor nitpick that was very easy to forgive, only because right away it would be overshadowed by something that looked and sounded very awesome. So that was probably going to be a given. And so because of that, I thought to myself that on a technical level, this game just had it in spades. Now, the voices is where we get into what could be the beginning of the deviations from the original, because the original is definitely on the campier side, and I know a lot of people already know this, and that doesn't just come down to the writing, but also the voice acting. You have Leon spouting these stupid, corny one-liners, but he's doing it with this very hammy B-movie kind of delivery. And not necessarily just him. Sadler, Salazar, Ashley herself at times, Louise most definitely with the ballistics. So it's going to feed into that tone, because this game is going for that much more somber balance between serious and campy, similar to that of RE2, and it's more or less supposed to be kind of almost like a direct sequel to RE2. I mean, just for a second, think that the RE3 remake didn't happen, which a lot of people like to believe that it didn't, because it was a lackluster, to say the least. And not only that, but you also have a returning character from RE2, Leon. And this is not only, you could almost argue, the same character model, only aged up a little bit with some grayer hairs in on his head. But on top of that, you're also going to have that backstory about what happened in Raccoon City, how slightly emotionally scarred he is from that, and how troubled he was to the point where he had to go into like military service to take on a mission that was specifically designed for him by the president, hence our plot to rescue the president's daughter, Ashley, from this village that she was taken captive into. And so they're trying to balance that tone, but much like what other people have said, and I wholeheartedly agreed, sometimes that works in favor of the game and sometimes it doesn't. And I feel like the voice kind of exemplifies, or at least the voice talent across, kind of exemplifies that very well, especially with our two main leads, Leon and Ashley. So on the one side, you have the voice working very well for one character to make her much more likable, compelling, and nuanced, and that's most definitely gonna be Ashley. That was I can easily tell that was gonna be a very big make or break for Capcom to make Ashley likable, because almost 20 years since the game came out in 2005, and everybody unanimously agrees Ashley fucking sucks in the original. She is just annoying, Leon, and then making stupid decisions. So thankfully, I'm happy to report, and you've probably already heard some other reviewers say the same, that Ashley is actually cool and compelling and likable in this game. She still has her moments where she's freaking out a little bit, and I can already hear some people saying that, oh, she's a damsel in distress, but I picked out moments where she's definitely trying to help that. She's trying to fight back and be a help of Leon, but you're going to have villagers that are crazed up on mutant hormones, essentially. So, what else do you expect? And, I've seen some streamers and some players say, oh my gosh, it's so annoying. And I'm like, compared to the original, come on, man. I mean, it's annoying probably within the context of the gameplay, but as far as the character herself, I didn't mind her this time. And this is where, like I said, balancing out that much more somber tone approach to the voice acting and the story and the way her character is written worked in her favor. Who it didn't work in favor, I would probably say our main protagonist, Leon himself, because even though he was spouting those cheesy, campy one-liners in the original, he at least had a personality with that. He had this quirkiness to him that made him a lovable doofus saying those things. Like, there's compilations all over YouTube of him saying all this stupid stuff, not just from RE4, but probably RE6, maybe some of the spin-offs, etc. Here, not only am I going to echo what some people have said about him spouting lines like the bingo line at the beginning, but feeling a little out of place because of how serious he is in other moments. It almost feels like it's just placed there for fan service. But at the same time, he also loses a little bit of that personality. He becomes just a tinge bland. I still like him. He's not like unlikable or anything. But compared to the original, I can easily not blame anyone thinking that the original Leon Kennedy from the original game is a much more memorable and charismatic character than this one. Because much like he was in RE2, he has those moments of blandness. He has those moments of you should probably realize what's going on. At least he's not asking constantly what's going on around here, like in RE2, where I'm like, dude, you can easily tell that this police station's overrun by zombies. Like, do your shit. Here, he barely asks what's going on. He's just like, you know what? I have an objective. I gotta go. So I did appreciate that. His history in Raccoon City, it definitely seasoned him up a little bit, but there wasn't enough seasoning to still have a bland flavor to Leon. Again, he's still likable, but there's times where I just thought that he was just kind of meh, just kind of there. Now, some other characters, however, fall a little bit in the gray area where they weren't made worse or better, and sometimes I think that was obviously going to be a given, and it worked in favor of the game. I mean, if it ain't broke, don't fix. AKA the merchant. The merchant is still badass. What are you buying? He doesn't say what are you buying so frequently, but at the same time, it feels organic when he does say it because they changed up a few of his lines. They added more lines. And even though I think this is a different voice actor, he sounds just like the original. And was very immaculately picked to have the right voice handle the merchant because he's a staple NPC, and I feel like he still is here in the remake. Then on the other side of that gray area of being like the original, but here apparently it didn't work for some people, is of course the controversy behind the voice acting for Ada Wong, who the actress, I think her name is Lily Gao, I might be wrong, but I think her name is Lily Gao, received an awful lot of harsh criticism online to the point where she deleted her Instagram post and she was being harassed and all that. And I'm over here wondering why. She's delivering the lines exactly like the original. Bland and quite badly. Yeah, she's bad. Of course, this in no way, shape, or form dictates that she gets harassed. I don't condone that whatsoever, no matter how good or bad her performance is. That's fucking uncool and stupid. Like, how stupid do you have to be of a person to do that? with that said, I'm still even more bewildered by the fact that when she spoke, I honestly thought it was the same voice actress from the original, because Ada is the same kind of character that she was in the original. Just kind of walking around doing her badass stuff, but at the same time being, oh, hello, Leon, looking for this or looking for that, or I'm here to deliver this. You know, you scratch my back, I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but you get the point. You know, she's that type of character, that kind of anti-hero. And nothing really was done to change up her character. So I'm like, why did this demand harassment, but then the merchant was, remained the same? I don't know. I feel like the treatments were kind of the same, but because one is dealing with the beloved NPC and then the other one, you probably wanted her to, I don't know. I simply just don't understand where people were coming forward with that one. And for the most part, the story also kind of stays in that gray area as well. It more or less stayed the same, and they did take advantage of some opportunities of this being a remake to flesh out some of the backstory. So even though the blueprint to me looked the same as the original, I mean, again, I only played the original once. It was 2 years ago. I didn't grow up with it. I didn't play it an insurmountable amount of times. So I don't have it memorized. But for the most part, I felt like I got the gist of the story similarly to that of the original, with a couple of deviations where it wasn't really changed so much as it was kind of reshuffled. And so in that reshuffling, they were able to at least apply some backstory to amplify some things better and give them a little bit more of character. And I feel like the best one to come out of this opportunity to flesh things out was Luis. Much more lore and reasoning and incentive is built into his character that makes him a bit more likable. And again, without spoilers, like I said, some things that usually happen around characters like Luis get shuffled around. They don't really get taken out, but they get shuffled in a way where I'm like, okay, this worked in favor of the game here, and to me, I actually kind of like this better than the original, and this ultimately made Luis Serra one of the better supporting characters of this game. And though it depends on the person who plays, because I know that some people like to collect the stuff that's going on in the background, like the pieces of paper or reading inscriptions on the wall, but I do like that they fleshed out a bit more of that story with these collectibles. They more than likely were there in the original. I just felt like I was able to come across them a bit more naturally here, so I was able to get the context of some things, especially when certain characters used a particular ugly nickname, and then later, but because I read something earlier, I know why they said that nickname, so I was like, all right, that was a very worthwhile payoff. Now, there are a couple of elements, however, that lack the splendor of the original. And again, I don't really want to go into terrible specifics, but much like Leon, they get a little blander, they get a little generic. And frankly, I feel like Salazar and Sadler are probably two of the more memorable antagonists. Kind of get that treatment where I'm like, yeah, I feel like they're kind of twiddling their thumbs or twirling their mustaches a bit. And they had an opportunity to make them much more charismatic and awesome villains to watch and to just kind of chew up the scenery. You could almost argue that about Salazar, but I frankly can't believe I'm saying this, but I feel like they chewed up more in the original than they did here, even if the designs of some of them are a little bit better because of, again, the upgrade in technology, being able to flesh out some of the details on their character models. I would probably say, I would even argue that Salazar's design makes a bit more sense here because of the context of his character, whereas in the original I feel like it didn't make sense that he looked like a kid, and they're trying to say, oh, this is actually technically a grown man. And I'm like, then why does he look like a kid? I'm sorry, like yeah, you could say that, you never argue, but there's got to be some aging going on right there. They apply that to Salazar's design, so I thought that was pretty neat. But as far as writing of the character, they didn't really do anything to make them these memorable villains. They just felt like they were kind of in the way here in the remake. Now, in progressing through those obstacles, you have, of course, the aspect of survival horror, and Resident Evil is always known for survival horror, and I dug said survival horror in Resident Evil 2 Remake, which is why I loved it, despite some of the frustrations that I had with some mechanics that I can't deny. And that same excellent gameplay is back here in the setting and the atmosphere of Resident Evil 4, which is what I wanted and what I mentioned at the beginning of this review that I really always wanted to have. The blending of the mechanics and physics and gameplay of RE2 Remake with the lore and the setting and Leon of RE4. And that's precisely what I got. along with those same frustrations that annoyed me in RE2 Remake despite loving that game. Shooting, resourcing, and fighting still feels good, like balancing the shooting with the gameplay and the melee attacks. I actually got into a really nice groove and rhythm of being able to like take down some of the villagers, and as soon as that prompt came up, being able to roundhouse kick, I love that they were able to bring that back and incorporate that back into this gameplay while at the same time having it feel like RE2 instead of very finicky and wobbly and loose and all over the place like the original. They were able to tighten all that up and make it feel strong and satisfying. Unfortunately, a little bit of the slowness that both Leon and Claire had in RE2 is also here, and it led to an awful lot of annoying, frustrating moments that just frankly shouldn't be here. You know, there's a lot of moments that I'm like, we shouldn't be doing this. It shouldn't be this hard to do this one thing. It shouldn't take this long to reload, even though there's reload upgrades, and I'll talk about the upgrade system in a little bit here, but for the most part, it shouldn't take that long to, you know, go from aiming down sights to this, especially with the experience that Leon technically has in the context of the story by this point. And his sprint, you know, the game says click the left stick to run, and I'm over here like, this is not a run, this is a jaunt. What is he doing? Why is he taking so long to get up after being hurt? Why is he like, you know, slouching, kind of like wandering like a drunkard? I don't know. There's just moments where I'm like, it shouldn't be like this. I didn't bring myself to fully do this, but I almost wish I could bring back the crazy movements that we would have in RE6. And that would have probably led to some really, well, at least, at the very least, let's say lesser annoying moments. Now, speaking on annoyances, one thing that a lot of people are annoyed with, but I frankly did not mind, was the knife degrading and breaking over time. And I'll tell you why I didn't get bothered by this so much, because I did notice that this was a huge change. Even prior to the release of the game, this was a huge change that was going to get brought to the remake. And the reason for why I was down for it was because they incorporated the parrying. Being the fact that they were adding parrying to the game, I was like, all right, that's a nice balance. I'm able to parry attacks with the knife, as ridiculous as it is to see Leon hold up a chainsaw with the knife. I thought to myself, okay, I guess that kind of makes sense. All right, that's forgivable. What I do find even more annoying, though, that is not able to, you know, kind of take that away from me, is that the knife does take up a slot in the attaché case. That does not make sense to me, because in the original it didn't, and being that he puts it on his shoulder, on his pack, or on his holster, it's like, then it shouldn't really be taking up space on the attaché. Sure, let the extra knives, and of course all of the guns, be thrown in there, but not the knife. It doesn't make sense contextually to have the knife take up a slot. With that said, it's also noticeable that some factors, like puzzles, sometimes it works into clever moments. I know that Resident Evil has always been known for having these arbitrary puzzles where I'm like, who went through the extent of built, like in RE2 Remake, it's a police station and yet you have all these intricate puzzles. And I understand they try to throw in some backstory by saying that it used to be like a museum or whatever, but that still doesn't make sense for me, for there to be like these very, very stretched out puzzles. RE4, the original had those puzzles, but there were areas where it made sense, such as the castle. Village, not so much, but the castle surely didn't, because obviously these people being of this descent, they're going to have their secret compartments and their passageways and things like that, so they're going to make it annoying for someone to get through to those areas. And those are somewhat returned, leading to an awful lot of aha moments that genuinely made me satisfied and think to myself that I was smarter than I originally was. But at the same time, I noticed that there were a couple of others that were flat out just taken out of the game. I'm not going to exactly pick out which ones specifically, but there were some where I was like, I could have sworn there was something else here, and instead the game was just like, we don't have time for that. Let's just go to the next set piece or the next wave of enemies that you have to defeat in order to find Ashley. I don't know. So it's going to be a very subjective thing, a case-by-case thing. To me, it was just noticeable, but it didn't really bother me in one direction or the next. But likewise, like I said, that there were some moments where it was very clever. There's also some other moments later in the game where I was thinking to myself, why do you need this? Why do you need this specific item? I'm pretty certain you could just use your goddamn knife. You do not need the specific tool. Just use your knife. You'll get by. You're a trained professional. Just do this. With that said, the difficulty of this game was not, again, it was just, even though it led to some moments that were either a bit on the cheap side, the spammy side, some moments where, like I said, the slowness of Leon that he retained from RE2 Remake, even though it's supposed to be consistent with that because it's almost like a direct sequel, still frustrating, especially for it to be a survival horror and you have Leon slumping in some places, whereas the enemy or the boss fight is going zigzag, zigzag, and I'm like, dude, like, even on standard, which is what I played this on. I played this on standard. I didn't play hardcore, but I didn't play easy either or casual. I played it on standard, which is normal difficulty, like I do every game that I start up for the very first time. And for the most part, despite, again, those little frustrations with the movement and aiming down sights, the gunplay, the actual solving of some of the satisfying puzzles, being able to get into that momentum of shooting some enemies and allocating certain ammo to some enemies that I know are going to require it, flashbangs to some of those creatures, this, and that, and being able to manage my inventory, it was all very addictive and fun, and actually played into a game that, for the most part, felt balanced and nothing stood out too badly, save for, like I said, some of those spammy moments where I'm like, okay, you didn't have to just throw that in there. You're padding this out. And some of that arbitrary design that just feels a little inflated just to kind of throw in some artificial tension where I'm like, yeah, we didn't really need to do this, but it has to be a horror game, so we're tossing this in there. And even though I was able to get it through the first try, it still, from a design standpoint, stood out to me. I was like, did that really need to be in there? I know it's a remake, and I know that this is technically brand new to the remake. This wasn't in the original, but did that really have to be there? At the end, however, of my 20-hour playthrough, which I understand it probably could have been beaten a little bit less than that, probably in about 15 hours, but A, took a handful of breaks, B, like I mentioned at the beginning of the review, there were days where I just flat out didn't play, and then there were other times where I really did want to take up a little bit of this atmosphere, a little bit of the scenery. I would just kind of stop and kind of look around, and not even necessarily sprint. I wouldn't click in the left stick. I would actually take my time and just kind of walk to absorb a little bit of this atmosphere, the cinematography, and the technical design, because it really is just that impressive. And overall, I can honestly say I had a fun time going through Spain, despite the crazy turn of scenery in the third act, which is actually taking something from the original, and I feel about it here as I did in the original. We go into an area where it doesn't even feel like the same game in the third act, and I always thought it was a little disorienting from a storytelling perspective, but overall, this game I actually had quite an awful lot more fun than I did the original. So much so that I'm almost willing to say that this is not only a better experience than the original, but I would gladly play this again. I really would. Probably not immediately because I want to get to Hi-Fi Rush. There's a couple of other titles I want to get through before we potentially start up Dead Island 2. I'm going to keep that on my radar, but it does look fun. And then, of course, at the end of this month, we got Jedi Survivor. Jedi Fall. Jedi Survivor. I said it right. And so there's a couple of other titles, but this is unlike the original. This is a game that I don't rule out the possibility of replaying, maybe on a harder difficulty, maybe to try something new with New Game Plus, etc. And so many things work in its favor that this is ultimately one of the finer experiences I've had in gaming this year thus far. And even though it's not a perfect remake and I'm not moved by, again, nostalgic glasses or this admiration for a game that influenced an entire generation of third-person shooters, it is, however, reminiscent of a game that pays not only homage to its original influence, but also the other games that it influenced with the original. There's times where you can now crouch and kind of evoke a stealth approach, which I completely overshadowed here at the very end of the review. I'm so sorry, but there is pretty much an approach where you can do an awful lot of like knife takedowns via stealth. And when I approach these moments and the way that he's kind of scavenging for resources and parts so he can build ammo and health equipment and all this stuff, I'm thinking to myself, is it just me, or have we come back full circle, kind of like how Tomb Raider influenced Uncharted, and then Uncharted influenced the Tomb Raider reboot? I'm feeling like Resident Evil influenced games like The Last of Us, and then The Last of Us is now influencing the remake, because there are times where I almost called one of these villagers a clicker. And I'm thinking to myself, yo, you cannot sit there and tell me that there are times where Leon is kind of crouching and moving around similar to that of Joel. So it looks like we finally come back full circle, and thus making this a very solid game of the year contender. Just don't know if it's actually going to stay at that top, because we have an awful lot of heavy hitters for the remainder of the year, like Spider-Man 2, Jedi Survivor, like I mentioned. Some fighting games are starting to take up the scene, like Street Fighter 6 and possibly Fighters, Mortal Kombat 12, which is rumored to come out this year. We shall see how the year unfolds, but for now, I can at least take solace in giving Resident Evil 4 Remake a very solid, enthusiastic, and positive 8 out of 10. At least on standard difficulty. I don't know if hardcore or professional can kind of influence the spammy nature of it or the balance of how that difficulty panned out, but at least for my standard experience and my run through, I was left grinning while the credits rolled, and I was given that B ranking at the very end of my 20-hour playthrough. With that all said and done, it's time to tackle some of these spoilers and some of these key differences from the original that I was able to retain. So this is your formal spoiler warning. If you have not played RE4 Remake, then please exit either the video on YouTube or the podcast on your platform of choice and come back after you have beaten the game. However, if you want to stick around regardless, or you have played the game, let me break down exactly some of the differences that stood out to me that, again, as I hinted at in the initial part of the review, what worked in favor of the game and then what didn't. Now, I also do want to preface this section with the spoiler section that I'm not exactly the biggest expert. I don't even want to say the word expert, but just very knowledgeable about the original RE4, because again, I've only played it once. I didn't really play it from the childhood era of my gaming days. It wasn't in 2005, it was in 2021. Played it once, and because of how frustrated I was with the controls, the mechanics, the physics of how just everything worked in-game, in-system, along with just everything, just overall a lot of things that just frustrated me and made me want to just press through the game and just be done with it by the end, especially when all of that stuff was kind of documented live for me to stream. There's just not a whole lot that I'm able to retain per detail, but there's a list of things that I bullet pointed here on my Google Docs sheet here, where that stood out to me as things that I looked at and said, yeah, I distinctly remember this standing out to me as a key point in the original game, and here it was changed for the remake, and for some things it was for the better. In fact, I would argue, I'm going to go ahead and spoil it now, most of it worked in favor of the remake, and then other times, it didn't necessarily bother me or think to myself, oh, it was like a negative or anything like that, but it just stood out to me as just a question as to why it is that it was changed this way, even though it didn't benefit nor hurt. So I was just wondering what was exactly the mindset behind pulling this from the original game or tweaking this to favor this other thing, but then it creates kind of like this domino effect, which does kind of illustrate exactly the actual work that went into remaking this game to bring it to modern audiences, both from a gameplay standpoint, from a story perspective. And so a lot of things, like I said, work more favorably towards the game. And these are some of the things that just kind of stand out to me. At the very top is just to kind of, at the very top of my list here, was just to elaborate a little bit more on that tone, that balance and tone, where they tried to somber things up so that it's a bit more cohesive with that of RE2 Remake versus that of the original RE4 that leaned a little bit more towards the campiness and towards the very melodramatic delivery of some of the lines from various characters, most notably Leon himself. And so here he's a bit more nuanced in his demeanor, but because of that, whenever the creators, the developers, are trying to retain some of those charismatic or goofy lines that are very iconic from the original, such as the bingo line after you're done with that terrible, well, and when I say terrible, I mean terrible in the sense that it's just agonizing and anxiety-inducing. It's still decently well done as far as building anxiety. It's not a bad segment. It's just like, it just triggers my anxiety to no end. But of course, I'm talking about the village section, the one that's on the timer. Yeah, this time it really did feel like the AI behind the... Because I was trying to implement the same strategy as I did in the original, where I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to run around in circles. I'm not going to just waste a bunch of ammo because I know that this segment is on a timer. I knew that going in. And it still technically is. This is not only on a timer, but they tried to retain as much from the original as possible, and that's why it was then sliced out of the game to be released separately for free as the quote-unquote chainsaw demo. So this segment was still anxiety-inducing, but this time I did notice that some of the AI was programmed in a way that was actually pretty smart for them to do. But when this segment is over, you then have Leon say the famous line, "Where's everybody going? Bingo." And this moment is important for me to point out because this comes after the exchange he has with those two cops in the car at the beginning where he's rolling up to the village in Spain. And you have that iconic Spaniard music playing, the flamenco. And here's the deal, though. In that original, this exchange between him and the officers in the car establishes what kind of Leon you're really dealing with. You know, he's got that line where he's like, "You guys didn't come around here to roast marshmallows around the campfire. Or perhaps, maybe you did." I'm paraphrasing. I'm probably, misspeaking on some things. But he delivers that line with, like I said, that B-movie kind of quality. And yet they do it again here, but it's using, again, the demeanor and the delivery of the RE2 Leon. So when he gets to the bingo line, I was like, yeah, it's the bingo line, but it just sounds kind of weird coming from this Leon. And so that's what I was talking about in the spoiler-free section, where I felt like the trade-off in terms of changing things up and refining them as far as personalities didn't really favor Leon all that much. It, however, completely gave Ashley the advantage. And to me, one of the key moments that I knew they needed to change, because this stood out to me as a very infuriating moment in the original as far as story and character, and thankfully they changed it here. They moved it a little later in the game, if I'm not mistaken, and when it does happen, again, it happens in a way that completely makes sense, and I was actually able to vibe with, and that's when Ashley has her first coughing fit where she's coughing up blood and she realizes, she's infected by this thing as well, which is also, again, reshuffled a little here as far as exposition. Luis kind of tells them after the cabin segment, which, again, the cabin segment still sucks. I'm sorry, it's still annoying. I'm not saying it's game design, it's just not for me in terms of taking a whole segment of the game and just pretty much making horde mode out of it to the point where you're even putting up the planks. And I understand the original had that. It influenced the horde mode from Gears of War and all these third-person shooters, etc. But this is probably something that they could have done a little in a much more clever way, at least for my personal taste. Again, purely subjective. You might feel a different way. You might think that it's probably fine as it is, but I think that they could have elaborated a little bit more to make it a bit more fun rather than just annoying in some cases where all you want is just to breathe and to have Leon, reload the speed, but the default speed of which he reloads some of these guns is just so god-awfully slow, and I'm just there just pulling teeth, just trying to make sure that this guy's putting in the bullets the right way. Meanwhile, I'm getting gangbanged all over the place by villagers, almost not even figuratively. So shortly after this moment, however, Luis exposes the information that both Ashley and Leon have this stuff. So she kind of already has a gist of what's going on here. Whereas in the original, she's still coughing up blood and she's freaked out, and she does that annoying thing where she coughs up the blood. Leon simply reaches out and vocalizes that asking her, "Are you okay?" Ashley's knee-jerk reaction is to be like, "Get away," and just runs off and even pushes Leon off. You can see from the body language, this dude's been, not only is trying to help you in this moment, he's been trying to help you in the past hour or so, because this is not their first meetup. They've been, he's been escorting her now for a little while inside the castle, and then she just runs up "Get away from me," and then that's where she runs into the wall, gets trapped by a booby trap that's laid down by Salazar, and then the wall turns around and she's gone, and now she's captive again. And that was just annoying because she didn't have to run off that way. What do they do in the remake to completely switch this all around? And again, it's the best example as to why some of these changes favor some characters, and Ashley being one of them, is that when this moment happens, she coughs up blood, and when Leon thinks that she is okay, she passes out, and while he's holding her, trying to recuperate her, she gets possessed. via the Plaga, through the conduit of the Plaga, she gets possessed by Sadler, and pulls out a knife on Leon, and it's clearly not her via the eyes getting all bloodshot red with the veins kind of going around the face and things like that. And thankfully, she's able to snap out of it. And when she notices what she has done, she slowly backs up, and yeah, she runs away. And people could use this as an excuse, but she noticed the damage that she caused. She knows that, oh no, I'm dangerous. I can lose it. I legitimately blacked out. I don't know what happened. And she, verbalizes that via her body language, like, hey, I don't know what I did, and I can't know what I did, and she runs off. And thankfully, unlike in the original, she didn't get captive. She actually went and hid. She actually competently hid herself away inside of a room that Leon has to break into. It wasn't like she got caught by the enemy here. She actually distanced herself because she's conscious about what kind of danger she not only possesses to herself, but to others, including Leon, the very guy that is rescuing her. Of course, taking a step back, it's not probably the smartest move, but it's also the most instinctful move, if that makes any sense, for a character like Ashley. And when Leon comes over and says, hey, I'm trying to help you, she's like, hey, I might hurt you, I don't want to do that. And Leon consoles her, and she's down. She's like, all right, let's try this again. And this, again, there's other moments that happen later on in the game, but to me, this is the moment, this is the change that made me go, yeah, this definitely favored Ashley, maybe not so much Leon. And this is also another reason for why Luis was a much more charismatic character to me this time around. Sure, he had his one-liners, he was the ladies' man in the original as well, and you can kind of buy that into his looks. But he was just that archetypal character that you're like, oh yeah, he's the likable, swanky guy. So he's definitely gonna die. And that's not to say that he doesn't here in the remake, but not only is his character model a little... Okay, this might sound a little messed up, but he's a little uglier, but that makes his charisma a bit more compelling. You know what I'm saying? Whereas him saying that he's the latest man in the original, but because he was already kind of handsome, it kind of made him come off as a little arrogant, as a little too overly confident. Whereas here, it feels like, him saying ladies man while at the same time kind of having like the teeth be a little weird and having that grimace. I'm like, it just struck me as a little more likable and relatable, if that makes any kind of sense. And on top of that, they layer him out as the researcher that he was in the original, but you get, because of thanks to the motion capture, the tech on the face, the rigging, as well as the voice and the way that he was written, I got a sense of more remorse coming from this Luis than the original. And what made his death sting all that more is because we were not only given more time with Luis, because his death comes much later, something that was actually hinted at in one of the recent trailers as to why I didn't want to watch anymore, because that trailer at the last state of play showed him during a moment that I knew he wasn't in. He's supposed to die in the castle, and yet he was already doing I can't remember what it was. Oh, in the mines. He was in the mines with Leon, and that's when I was like, wait, Leon's by himself there in the original. That I did remember. And so I thought that was a pretty interesting change to have his death come at the hands of Krauser later on in the game rather than earlier, like in the original. And that also made, like I said, his arc kind of sting a little bit more because he was trying to do the right thing. He knew that shit was going down while he was a researcher. He's like, you know what, I'm out. And that's where he struck the deal with Ada. And so this made a better Luis, in my opinion. I actually favor Luis and Ashley better in the remake than in the original, but Leon is actually a little bit more fun, if that makes sense, in the original. So, and again, like I mentioned before, Ada, Sadler, and Salazar are kind of more or less the same. Salazar, in my opinion, does exemplify the changes not so much in story or character, but rather in gameplay. And this is actually the perfect segue into the changes and shufflings that they made to the gameplay than in the original. And I already covered a good chunk of them in the spoiler-free discussion because I was talking about how now you can finally get rid of the tank controls with the brand new tech, bring in the sensibilities of the RE2 remake into here where you can actually move and aim. Granted, you're still moving slower, but at least you're able to move and aim, period. And so you're able to still handle an awful lot of that polish from the RE2 remake here with RE4 remake. But the Salazar fight, or Salazar himself in general, is also another great example that I like to pick. Again, there's a numerous amount of other examples that you could probably have other people on the internet that are able to dissect RE4 in its completion for like an hour and a half long video. And I don't feel like I'm necessarily qualified to do that, but the one, character that exemplifies changes in gameplay is Salazar himself. Because Salazar technically has two quote-unquote boss fights / set pieces in the original, and one was kept, but the other was actually taken out. That I immediately noticed when we started to get to certain parts of the castle and the clock tower, and we were starting to kind of wind down a little bit on the second act of the movie, and of the game, and I knew that the island was coming up, and then I thought to myself, hey, don't we fight or run away rather from Robo Salazar at this point, as I like to call him, or Mecha Salazar? And sure enough, we get to Salazar's main boss fight where he gets mutated. And finally, that was my confirmation. Yeah, we're not getting Robo Salazar. We're not being, chased over by this giant Salazar mech. Instead, it's fused into the clock tower elevator sequence from the original. And he's pretty much just a rotating head that's throwing out fire from its mouth. And I actually did appreciate this change. Because if you're going to be bringing in, again, the balance of the somber and serious tone with a little bit of campiness from RE2 Remake, you can't have this giant robot Salazar chasing Leon around. You can't do that. It's just going to be way over the top. It would have been a step too far, and I'm glad that they were able to take that sequence out and simply just have him be a very stiff statue, but with a rotating head with a flamethrower that you have to avoid as you get to that elevator sequence. So that I did appreciate. Now, the actual boss fight you have with Salazar after he mutates and turns into that little, clam creature or whatever the hell that thing is. It's sadly a change that I don't think was in the best way possible. I can't bring myself to say it was the worst, but it's funny because the actual design of this boss fight and the look, the atmosphere, the music, all the elements, all the different components to make up the chemistry that is the Salazar fight in the remake are there. But two things stand out to me. One is that he is moving in a way where I feel like he was meant for, this might have been a creature design or a boss fight design for a different Capcom game, maybe even Devil May Cry or something, and was now thrown into RE4 Remake, where you have Leon moving way too slow to actually be able to have a chance at this version of Salazar. And I say that, again, having played this in standard difficulty. I didn't play it in hardcore, but even on standard, this is the fight. This Salazar fight was the fight that I spent the most time on and probably had the most deaths on. Alright, spoiler alert, the Salazar fight took me longer and killed me more than even both Krauser fights and the Sadler fight at the end. True story. And it's because of how way overly kinetic he is. And again, in a different game, I think this boss fight would have been amazing and top tier caliber, one of the more memorable ones. But I feel like here he's memorable for a completely wrong reason, which is that he was just infuriating because he's spitting these acid bubbles and Leon again is moving so slow and he gets staggered. He gets staggered by just the simplest of things that I'm like, dude, get up, reload. And this guy's supposed to be already a trained professional, a trained soldier or whatever the hell. He went to this camp on a Krauser's command and training. I don't get why he's moving so slow. I really don't understand. His slowness may have gone him by in other segments of the game when managing, the spacing between him and the enemies and having that claustrophobic kind of feeling. And here, again, I appreciate that they quite literally detached Salazar from the wall from the original so that it could be a bit more of a kinetic and dynamic fight. I just don't think that the physics for Leon work in favor of delivering a great fight with someone that's just so frenetic as this version of Salazar. And to me, it just did not pan out for a boss fight. This is probably the only blemish as far as boss fights. Otherwise, we would have had almost a straight across the board awesome template of boss fights and great set piece encounters for the RE4 remake. This was also the boss fight that made me realize that if only there was a way to have upgraded aiming, because you can upgrade your reload speed, your what's called the rate of fire, the ammo capacity, and then of course the power. But unless it's locked behind that ticket exchange thing in the attaché with those tickets, those exclusive tickets that you buy from the merchant with the spinels, you can't upgrade accuracy unless you maybe apply like a stock. Like the TMP comes with a stock that definitely helps with the recoil, but other than that, you can visibly see Leon's hand shaking when you're trying to aim down your sights. And I'm over here just like, dude, realize where you're moving, because there's other moments in the game where this happened. But once again, in the Salazar fight, the weak point in the middle of his mouth where he's located, his mutated self is located, is right there. It's just right there. And yet, right when sometimes it almost feels like it's done on purpose. Like conspiracy theory, David talking here, there's times where I feel like the game is almost like it's programmed that right when I press the trigger, the character moves. The character moves. Like the character's like, oh, there's a sensor going off on the trigger on the DualSense. I gotta move, and moves out of the way. And that's where I'm just like, why can't I just upgrade the aiming so at least I can feel a little bit more sense of power and control over the way that Leon handles? And that's because sometimes Leon doesn't handle all that well for every single fight. And there's plenty of other examples, but to me, the one that's able to kind of encapsulate all this is the Salazar boss fight, because otherwise we would have had top tier boss fights across the board, like I mentioned. So I really wish that that would have been something that you could upgrade when talking to the merchant, would be aiming. However, the other things that you are able to upgrade and you're able to buy, sell within the attaché, as well as talking to the merchant, who is really well balanced. He's not overly used or underused. They struck gold with the way that they were able to implement the merchant here. And this system just teetered on that of being addictive, because I actually found myself in a nice rhythm of selling treasures, selling parts, selling even some weapons that I knew were kind of redundant. Like, sometimes I found well, not really sometimes, but once or twice I did find myself owning 2 SMGs, and I thought to myself, okay, which one is probably going to be the more effective one, depending on which setting of the game I'm in, whether am I in the village, am I in the castle, am I in the island, and who's going to be more prone to be bullet sponges, pretty much. And I was so addicted by this constant exchange and selling, allocating my gemstones. Trust me, I was stingy with my gemstones. I didn't sell right away. Thought to myself, okay, let me be methodical about which treasures I can inlay gemstones, sell them for a large profit, and allocate all that stuff, along with the spinels that you earn from completing pretty much this game's equivalent of side quests, which are these errands that are kind of laid out throughout the map and laid out throughout the playthrough. And most of them are going to be returning from the original game, such as the blue medallions, but ever so often you'll have one that was not from the original game where you have to take care of a much harsher enemy. To me, one of the more memorable ones was the Golden Knight in that hallway in the mausoleum, where you have standard knights, but then you have a Golden Knight that is much more difficult to kill, but the reward is much more well worth it, because it's part of a side quest that you can trade in for some extra spinels. The spinels, because them used on exclusive items in the merchant store. And so I actually found myself doing some of these side errands. There, I found the blue medallions, and I was like, yo, I think I can do this right now. Let me pace myself. Let me, be a little, methodical about this, and actually take care of these medallions, take care of these rats. Because whenever I would hear a rat, I'm like, I can kill it. It's probably a side quest. Let me try to do it. And I would actually stop myself and kill these rats. Meanwhile, Ashley or Louise are just kind of like, what are you doing? But it was actually addictive and worthwhile to do. Didn't do every single one, and sometimes it was a little interesting that the blue medallions are a little easier to do this time. Maybe that's another thing that kind of actually is a perfect segue into another debate that I kind of want to bring up about the RE4 remake is, are there parts of this, and if you're watching this on YouTube, go to the comment section and let me know, are there parts of the game that I did think were quote unquote dumbed down for modern gaming audiences? Because the blue medallions are actually a good example where if you come across them on the map without coming across the actual errand that you pick up, like the piece of blue paper that you pick up telling you, hey, can you take care of these medallions? You won't see them on the map. You have to actually just see them within the environment to see if they catch your eye, which are almost all the time going to do because they're very bright blue amongst all the grays and blacks and browns. But once you do come across that paper telling you to go do the blue medallion side quest, they flat out appear on the map. They are all over the map. You can actually see where they're at. And it's easy work from that point forward. And I do not remember them showing up on the map in the original game. In fact, they wouldn't even give they wouldn't give it to you as an errand or as a side quest. It would just be a thing that would be in your objectives or in your stats saying, did you get the blue medallions in this segment? Oh no, you better go find them. And I was never able to actually properly locate them, and I gave up in the original. Here, I'm not going to say I did all of them, but I almost want to say I did either half or about 2/3 of the blue medallion quests. And I know that I know that one of the things that helped me do that is that they would appear on the map. Now, that's not that similar treatment is not given to every single side quest or every errand. The rats, for example, you get a quest to go take care of some rats, but I don't remember the rats ever appearing on the map. If anything, maybe they could have like highlighted an area where they're running around and they usually are nested, but they're not going to point out the individual rats. But they never did that, so they kind of pick and choose. They just chose to go with the blue medallions as the easier one. But everything else is, like I said, a little, worth your time if you're willing to go the extra mile so you can get better upgrades and make the rest of your playthrough easy. It's not to say that you might need to, because again, this kind of reminded me of how some other segments I thought to myself, is it just me or was the original tougher and more challenging and ultimately more satisfying? And that brings me to the Sadler and Krauser fights. Not only did they get rid of the gate puzzle from the original leading up to the second and last Krauser fight inside of the ruins and the catacombs that were part of that dig site. I remember in the original you had to like find these different pieces of this emblem so you can open up a gate and then finally get to Krauser. Here they completely bypass that altogether. You're pretty much just straightforward fighting Krauser with a couple of segments that aren't even set pieces. You're just kind of pushing forward and you think to yourself, oh, am I fighting Krauser here? No, it's just a segment that you have to kind of press up on the stick. And that's again where we get to segments of the game that I think are a byproduct and you could almost argue a symptom of modern gaming, which are these segments where the Krauser fight, in my opinion, were a little easier. The Sadler fight was a little easier. It's almost kind of identical to that of the original, but I do think that they slowed him down. And if you don't believe me, believe my statistics from the game, my ranking from the game, or again, my statistics and the chapter summaries for the last two chapters that hold the Krauser and Sadler fights. I didn't die. First try on both of them. I'm not going to say I got them down quickly. It wasn't like a breeze. I spent a good time on them and I used some health items and I had to like crack some barrels and crates to get some resources. But on both Krauser fights, the first one where after he kills Luis and the second one where he mutates, and then Sadler's fight at the end where he turns into the spider-like monster with all the eyes on him, which again they made in my opinion a little bit easier because you you obviously know what you have to shoot. You have to shoot the eyes and then come up close up to the knife. Granted, to give myself a little bit more credit, I did fully upgrade the combat knife to full capacity, at least full power. Not durability, but full power. And then I had the Killer 7 with me in my attaché, so that helped out. But even then, I still think that in terms of how they were moving, what their patterns were, and I'm speaking for both Krauser and Sadler, I truly do believe they were made a little easier. And on top of that, combined with that, the fact that they got rid of the puzzle or the obstacle of getting the emblem pieces to get to Krauser, and Sadler again was slowed down a little bit. And then, if we want to go on the other opposite end of the game towards the very beginning, the Del Lago fight or set piece. I remember, mashing my controller to make sure that Leon swam to the boat when he was knocked off in the original. And this was genuinely scary because not only did it harken to one of my favorite horror films, or rather my favorite films of all time, Jaws, because, swim, the Delago is right on my ass, and I'm trying to get to this boat, and a number of times the Delago would either get me, or I would manage to get to the boat literally centimeters away from the Delago getting me, and it was just thrilling in the original. That never happens here. The Delago fight towards the beginning is honestly just a couple of prompts away from being a QuickTime event. You're really just harpooning him down that are made out of infinite harpoons inside of that measly little dinghy, conveniently. And it's just a matter of, turning the stick in a couple of directions, throwing the harpoons, and eventually it gives out. Leon is never knocked off the boat, you never have to swim, and you never feel like you're inches away from death. And that ultimately, all these different things kind of led me to think that these parts were pared down for modern audiences so it could be a bit more accessible. And, you could argue that this is more of a subjective matter. To me, I do think that it kind of took away a little bit of the thrill, a little bit of the scare, because those were moments that when they were done, I put the controller down, I got the chapter end screen, and I was like, yeah, I can't believe I'm bringing myself to say this, but the original did that one better. So I'm not going to say that the remake nailed everything across the board. It is an overall better product of the original, but there were things that I have to give the original credit for because of the way that it was able to place horror first and action second. And there's even moments where this remake, again, falling victim to modern gaming, it places not only action first and horror second, but sometimes it even single-handedly focuses on inaction. That segment towards the end, since we're kind of in the rife here of spoilers and we're bringing it down to a close, that segment towards the end where you are taking Ashley to go get the Plagas extracted and radiated off of her, that is in the original, but you're actually escorting her in that traditional way. As soon as that segment came up in the remake, and I'm carrying Ashley, and now we're in quote-unquote gameplay mode, and I'm using the terms quote emphatically, I was like, oh no, here it is, the Last of Us effect. And I'm sorry if this could trigger some folks listening, but I think we've come full circle. And I might have already hinted at this earlier in the game in this review, where we've come full circle, like Tomb Raider influenced Uncharted and then Uncharted influenced the Tomb Raider reboot. It seems like we have that same case for better and for worse for Resident Evil 4, where Resident Evil 4 was very influential for a lot of third-person over-the-shoulder shooters, including The Last of Us. And now it looks like The Last of Us has influenced the RE4 remake. I talked about this in the gameplay section of the spoiler-free section, where I said that it influenced the stealth, the crouching and crafting as you're crouching, and then, taking people out from behind with the stealth kill and things like that. But on the negative side of things, it also influenced the bad, I don't want to say bad parts, but the very non-gaming parts of The Last of Us, including what is now becoming a bit of a meme, a very harsh meme on Sony's expense, which is press forward to move to get this gameplay segment out of the way. Just press forward. Just press up on the stick. And it's during the segment where Leon is carrying Ashley into the chair, and he's having these flashes to like a tunnel that's submerged in water, and you have the Las Plagas, the Illuminados illusions kind of appearing before him, and it's obviously hallucination. I can't say it, but it's an illusion. And so I was like, oh man, we're doing this. Like, I'm not gonna lie, I winced a little bit because I understand the full circle influence, but you don't have to mimic every section that it becomes a little too transparent that this is very much that modern gaming effect. And I was kind of hoping it wouldn't be here, but it is. You press forward and it's just Leon walking. You're not aiming, you're not fighting anything, you're just pressing forward to create this, what a lot of people like to call walking simulator segment. and it happened in the RE4 remake here. And it is a little concerning that this is where modern games are, and the time of just putting gameplay first. I don't know where it might be in 2-3 years from now. Again, I must reiterate that I thoroughly did enjoy this remake, but there were some kind of superfluous things happening here that are symptoms and victims of modern gaming, whether it be this walking segment with Leon towards the end where he's carrying Ashley, or the bypassing of some things that did work in the original, like Mendes' eye popping out when you kill him. In the original, his eyes used to activate a door. And the whole time you were thinking to yourself, like, why is this, why is this recess in the door that is completely shaped like an eye? And then once Mendes' eye pops out after you kill him, oh, you had that aha moment, like, oh, that's where it goes. Remake, his eye just pops out and you just sell it. You don't really use it for a puzzle. And I'm like, then why have his eye pop out as a wink and nod to the original? I mean, I'm sorry, but I gladly would have taken the puzzle because it would have been inventive and it would have had you take advantage of the tech. And here, it just kind of came off as a little arbitrary. And not only that, but some of the presentations of the, now that we're on the subject of Mendes, his boss fight was still pretty cool, but the way it's presented felt a little rushed. Like, I remember him transforming in the original, I was like, oh shit, oh no. Whereas here, Leon blows up a tank, or, a barrel, red barrel, and from behind the fire, Mendes already appears transformed. I was like, oh, well, that was a little underwhelming. So, little factors here and there. I can't believe I'm saying this again, but the original handled a little bit better, and that's why I wanted to save for the spoiler section to talk about some of those things. Nevertheless, I must reiterate, you must not get it twisted. This remake, as the big picture, is still better than the original by a margin. And unlike the original, not only do I actually have the incentive, the feeling, the motivation to replay this again at some point. Maybe not anytime soon because, like I said, there's other things in my backlog that I kind of want to get done. But I actually want to replay this remake again and see if I can get a better score, a better ranking than just a B. I ended up with a B. A better ranking than a B. Maybe even get an A. Maybe get it played under the 12-hour mark like a lot of folks do. Maybe try a different outfit for Leon, like the pinstripe outfit or that cool gas breather mask or the cool glasses that kind of look similar to the ones I wear in real life. And makes me actually support the idea of a Resident Evil 5 remake, which does in fact get teased during the mid-credits scene. We have Ada flying away in the helicopter with the Amber, and who's waiting at the other end? It is Wesker. Of course, this was in the original, but the fact that they replicated it here with a brand new model for Albert Wesker, you don't just make an Albert Wesker model and cast someone to do the voice and not utilize that asset. Oh yes, he will be back, and considering that this goddamn remake sold, 3 million copies on its first weekend? Yeah, it's kind of a given. We're going to get an RE5 remake. But I'm interested for two different reasons. One is obviously because if they're able to take some of the physics and some of the things that really work in the favor of the tech that they implemented in not just RE2 remake, but the RE4 remake and incorporate it into RE5 remake. And then the second thing, from a much more cynical approach or cynical viewpoint, it would be how they handle certain aspects of Resident Evil 5 that, to put it mildly, would not work in today's social climate. Your move, Capcom, because I really want to see how that plays out. It's purely for fun. Purely for fun. Anyways, that wraps up the spoiler discussion and the overall review on Resident Evil 4 Remake. It's a solid 8.5 out of 10 for me. And it's definitely one of the highlighted experiences in gaming that I've had this year thus far. It'll probably make my top 5. I just don't think it's going to be that high up on the top 5 because of some of the things that I wish they could have tweaked from the RE2 remake, whether it be the mechanics, how slow Leon can sometimes be, how spammy some of the enemies could be from time to time. But nevertheless, I'll gladly take the remake over the original, and I might just be one of the few folks that will say so. So, if you're listening to this on YouTube, let me know in the comments. Do you guys prefer the original or the remake? Have you played the remake? Are you going to be picking it up later on in the year? And are you looking forward to any other kinds of remakes, whether it be from Resident Evil franchise or from other franchises in Capcom's catalog or other, publishers? Or do you think that we'd really need to start, deviating from the remakes, stop with the remakes, and bring on forward something new? Though I am interested to see how they tackle an RE5 remake, should there be one, which is, again, kind of a given at this point, considering how RE4 Remake sold. There is a part of me that I wish that they would kind of take the Square Enix approach that they're doing with Final Fantasy VII Remake, where the first one is the remake, but then after that it's going in a completely new direction, that it's almost like a reimagining. And I would like to see Resident Evil kind of get that treatment. And who knows, maybe 5 Remake will do that to address some of those controversial aspects. We'll just have to wait and see. Otherwise, guys, thank you guys for listening or watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, if you guys liked it, hit the thumbs up or the like or whatever, the 5-star rating on your podcast platform of choice. And until next time, guys, take care and stay humble. See you later.
Then come, Sancho Panza. Let us rescue the Princess Dulcinea.
You're gonna hurt yourself.
Sorry, bad traffic. Come, Mr. Hunnigan.
This is kind of fun.
Ahead.
You're kidding.
Yes, the time has come.
Like I told you, I'm gonna get you home safe.
Ready to die, rookie.
Exalt all,
Leon!
and let it be so.
This time, it has to be different.